Yeah, and ironically, we have collectively become addressed as a bumblebee in terms of black and sort of technically yellow, but orange, and that is Mbeumo colours. So the situation is this, and it could, of course, move very quickly in the next few days. But as of last night, and remember, I'm here in America first thing in the morning, Manchester United have finally placed their second bid for Bryan Mbeumo. It's in excess of 60 million, so not far off the valuation that Brentford are looking for. This 70 million number has always been a little bit misleading. We might hear it every so often because it's grandstanding. But as I've kind of always consistently reported, the number that Brentford are looking for is essentially a Cunha type figure. And then it all depends on the structure. And once you get into the broad ballpark valuation that a club are looking for, you finesse it. And that's kind of what's been happening. And Manchester United of old might have just bid 3-4 times. This Manchester United under Jason Wilcox are looking to try and have more confidence with every bid they place, leading to less offers. And therefore, the further we get in a saga that continues, because they will be prepared to walk away as well, the more chance there are of deals getting over the line. And at the moment, the sort of radio silence on accepted or rejected is actually probably quite a positive. And once again, we might get clarity of that, perhaps even whilst we're live, who knows? But the reality is that Manchester United, after the first bid, learnt two things, according to my information anyway. The first was they had to go higher in the guaranteed number because Brentford have always wanted a minimum of £50 million guaranteed, and maybe even a little bit more because it depends on the structure. And the second thing is how easy are the add-ons? How tied are they specifically to Mbeumo, such as appearances, rather than necessarily team-related things? And the last thing is those payment terms. So if, because I think it's quite helpful, you put it in Cunha terms, you may remember before Manchester United triggered the clause for Cunha, they wanted to pay that 62.5 million in 5 installments. Wolves said no. Manchester United said 4. Wolves said no. Manchester United said, okay, we'll do it according to the clause. It's 3. And this is where that sort of gag of Mateus Klarna came from, because those payment terms were actually quite an important part of the club-to-club before finally the clause was triggered with the stated payment terms. So this will be a similar situation, I suspect, where if Manchester United wanted to pay in 5, they might have to go 65, 67 million. If they're prepared to do it in 4 or 3, it might be close to 62.5 million. And I'm sure that that's the kind of thing the clubs are discussing. And we wait and see whether this bid is accepted. But even if it isn't, it's likely to be close. And there is now an expectation and an optimism on Manchester United's side that this deal can and will get done.
Itself last night that Manchester United are aiming to have him there for the 7th of July in pre-season. Is that a date where you would expect Mbeumo to be into Manchester United? And also I wanted to ask you about the wage as well, because it's been reported that it'd be around 150,000, the same as Cunha. Do you have any information on that?
Yeah, I'm told the wage would fit into Manchester United's structure. We hear some reports that Mbeumo wants 250,000 plus bonuses, even higher than that. That's not my understanding. I think the player would very much be a top 10 earner at the club and a similar kind of wage to Cunha, but not necessarily significantly more. Gone are the days where Manchester United are going to be offering Rashford or Sancho type wages, at least without that incentive-driven structure where you earn them rather than start on them. The other thing you have to bear in mind is that whatever Mbeumo is asking for in terms of perhaps his base wage will drop, because Manchester United are in a season without Champions League football. So what he starts on, should he join Manchester United, will not necessarily be the same as if the team starts succeeding. And then Manchester United remain happy to be paying a higher wage because ultimately the team and their players are doing well. And this is the commonality between Jim Ratcliffe and Chelsea. I know the model is very different because you can see straight away that this window, Ruben Amorim is being backed at the moment, even if all the targets don't come off, with what looks like proven Premier League experience. Chelsea's model in its formative stage went abroad. It was very youth focused. And that was maybe the difference between how Chelsea operated to begin with, trying to find young talents and get them before they really broke onto the scene at value. Manchester United like that idea, and they certainly want to get players on more reasonable wages, but they're dipping their toes into the established Premier League market. And that's evidenced by Cunha and also the fact that Mbeumo's a top target. And with the number 9 to Liam Delap, even though that one didn't come off. So when you kind of add up Manchester United's strategy in all of this, you can see they are being more disciplined with wages, with negotiations. They don't want sagas to drag on. And then regarding your question about Mbeumo, yes, they want him to be there for when pre-season starts, which means that this should be a big week in terms of giving clarity. It might be a big few minutes, hours, days, but I don't think we're going to have any messing around here, in the sense that Jason Wilcox's mantra is to get these deals done quick. And that means don't place 5-6 bids. So Manchester United, in making this second bid that I broke yesterday, will either be thinking we've had enough time with Brentford that we can get it close, or they'll be thinking maybe we have to make a third bid. But I think there'll come a point with every transfer where they're also going to be prepared to walk away as well, to make sure that if it's Mbeumo, he's in by pre-season, which starts on July the 7th. If it's not Mbeumo, they've got time to find another player before that date. And I think Manchester United in the past have maybe allowed themselves to be sucked into summer sagas where others in the industry, this is kind of dating pre-Jim Ratcliffe, but a lot of people I speak to outside of Manchester United sometimes look at a Manchester United saga, and many of them say, this will never come off. They'll never get the player at value. They'll be wasting their time. Or if it happens, the conclusion is they've paid a lot more than anyone else was prepared to pay in the industry. Whereas I think with Cunha, there's no one around I speak to that doesn't think 62.5 million will prove value. With Delap, even though he went to Chelsea, there's nobody around that doesn't think that 30 million clause was excellent value. With Mbeumo, 65 million, also not bad value, given the fact that you're bringing in a very experienced player who can score goals and play in a variety of different positions. So there's definitely been a shift in how Manchester United are doing business, and these kind of quick deals and bids with more confidence and being prepared to walk away are all things I'm told being very much driven by Jason Wilcox.
Ben, also, I just want to say, sorry Ben if you can hear me and I do sound like Darth Vader or a robot, and the chat as well. Apparently my mic wasn't working, we've tried to sort that, hopefully it is now fixed. Let me know if it is. So we just had a little bit of trouble with that. I sound good to you, Ben. Well, you know what? Well, at least you can hear my questions coming through. That is a good start, and hopefully, apparently it's still distorted in the chat, but we'll carry on and we'll keep going, and hopefully it'll all get fixed. If it's a Darth Vader voice, then you know what? It's just, you know, we're switching it up for today. But my next question for you, Ben, that I wanted to move on to was Alejandro Garnacho. We've seen the Villa shirt with Rashford on the back. There's been reports coming out that Manchester United are holding out for £70 million for the player. Do you know of any interested clubs, and also the price that Manchester United are seeking? Because to me, for a club that's made it known that this player has to be sold this summer, that seems quite high.
Yeah, there's no way the price is £70 million. Because it was £60 million in January. There's less time left on the contract. And logically, given the situation at the football club right now between Garnacho and Amorim, the fact that he's basically told to his face to go and find a new club, that's not a number that I expect Manchester United to hold out for. But of course, there's an element of grandstanding, and I think this is very much what clubs do, right? That people hear Mbeumo 70 million, and they think that might be the starting point, but it's probably not the price that you get a deal done for, unless you simply ask for so much in your favour, like long-term payment terms or the ability to have more add-ons. And this is the thing with a deal like Garnacho as well. People will focus on the number, but it's really, again, going to be about that structure, because Manchester United will want as much guaranteed as they can and to put as much of this so-called pure profit on the books, and therefore they will start with a very high number. But my expectation is that 60 million has always been the so-called asking price for Garnacho. Then, depending on the structure, maybe you stick to 65. It could be add-on heavy. Maybe you go down to 55. And we're hearing a lot of rumours at the moment. And I think the first thing to say is that there hasn't actually been any contact really regarding this notion of a Garnacho to Chelsea, even though we know they've got a long-standing interest, and then Christopher Nkunku to Manchester United. And Nkunku's here with me in America. He might even play tomorrow and get his first real opportunity during this Club World Cup. But it felt quite coincidental to me that at the same time, Chelsea are about to bid for their number one target on the left-hand side, Jamie Gittins at Dortmund, who they tried for in that Club World Cup window. And at the same time, in the evening, that Manchester United placed their second bid for Mbeumo. Suddenly, without any actual contact between the clubs, both are considering this Nkunku one way and Garnacho the other. And naturally, if Mbeumo arrives and similarly you have a situation where Gittins goes to Chelsea, there won't be any room for Christopher Nkunku at Manchester United, and there won't be any room for Alejandro Garnacho at Chelsea. So it's still quite an open situation. Even though naturally both clubs have looked at these players historically, they do have other priorities at the moment. Manchester United entirely focused on trying to get Mbeumo over the line. And from Chelsea's point of view, they will absolutely make a third bid for Jamie Gittins. As for the Garnacho and the Rashford shirt and the sort of speculation, I would say that's not something that you just go and get printed to make a stir. It's very likely that he's had that shirt for quite some time, but you do choose to post it. And that may suggest just solidarity with his mate, or it may provide a little bit of a clue to Garnacho and what he's thinking, and teasing the fact that, as we've known for quite some time now, he would like to stay in the Premier League if at all possible. And Villa might end up being one club to watch. That's absolutely true. The sort of irony of it all is that if Villa go for a player on that side, they might pick between Rashford or Garnacho, and they might go head to head. I don't think Rashford will end up going to Villa, because even if Villa wanted him, and they certainly enjoyed his loan spell, Rashford wants Champions League football. Rashford's got a very high wage. That'd be difficult. I think with Garnacho, they might be able to make it work. But again, not now. Nothing's going to move really with Aston Villa in the next days, because they have to focus more on outgoings due to their PSR position. Chelsea, as I say, have held this historical interest in Garnacho, but it looks like they're moving for Gittins. You got clubs like Arsenal who have internally mentioned Garnacho, but I've never been led to believe it's kind of going anywhere. So there might be Premier League options for Garnacho. We know Napoli have looked in the past as well, but at the moment, it's a bit like Rashford when he ended up going to Aston Villa on loan right at the end of a window. Garnacho doesn't really have a concrete bid. He doesn't have a club courting him in any advanced sense at the moment. So the player side are doing outreach to understand who can afford him, and then they'll determine whether or not that's going to materialize into a bid. But I suspect that there's going to be this kind of push from Manchester United to get Garnacho done earlier if they can, because that's the pure profit. That's the one that satisfies PSR. That's the one that allows them to move for a number 9 in the market. But I actually think that suitors might be more inclined just to wait it out, make Manchester United sweat, take this into July, even August, because then the price may drop. So that's going to be a really interesting dynamic. How urgently do Manchester United need this one big sale? And are they prepared to shave a bit off their Garnacho asking price to get it done quickly, to give them more freedom in the market? Or are they going to wait and again be really disciplined with this asking price? And if that's the case, then clubs may just say, okay, we'll take it down to the wire. We'll do this Garnacho deal in August, and then you're going to sweat. And then 5, 10, 12, 15 million might be knocked off that so-called, if it is a kind of public number, 70 million asking price.
Be interesting, especially considering that Manchester United know that Ruben Amorim wants his incomings in for the pre-season, and that's coming soon. 7th of July is when players are going to be reporting back for pre-season. There's not much time left to bring anyone in, especially if the big one, the striker, is relying on them outgoing. So another option then could be the likes of Marcus Rashford, who I wanted to bring up. Seems like he's holding out that Barcelona move despite Nico Williams the end of the window as well. And what position is Rashford in? Is it Barcelona or nothing? Is there other clubs interested? Could it even be the fact that it might be a loan? I wanted to get the lowdown on Rashford, because a lot of people expected 40 million. Marcus Rashford, he's got a great reputation, but it just doesn't seem like anything's moving there.
No, and part of that is wage and part of that is Rashford. As you say, his ideal preference is Barcelona. If there's a window of opportunity for Barcelona, Rashford's going to wait. And that's the challenge for Manchester United. And as I said before, a lot of these outgoings are intertwined, because if you sell Garnacho and Antony, for example, you might say, we are prepared to do a loan for Rashford to get the wage off the books, bring in some money, revisit it in a year's time. But at this point, they're not just going to do Rashford or any of these other players favours. Antony's not just going to get a loan to Betis because that's his preference. Rashford's not just going to get a loan to Barcelona because he wants to go there. And then you start pre-season and you've cleared the decks a little bit. Manchester United will have to bring in one, if not two, big fees. And whichever the first two are, the other players, if they wait it out, might get more preferential exit structures that allow them to go to the places where they want to be. But I'm sure if you knock on the Manchester United door right now as any club, you're told Antony's only available permanently, and the same for all of these other players. Once they bring in that big bit of income and can move for their number 9 in addition to hopefully Mbeumo, then maybe other players, if they're patient, will be able to somehow facilitate these kind of moves. Rashford has made it clear he wants Barcelona. Barcelona have made it clear they want Nico Williams. Nico Williams has made it clear that he wants to join, which is a new development, and he's prepared to cut his salary a little bit in order to make it work. But the challenge with Nico Williams is that the release clause is 58 million euros, which is excellent value, but it's got to be paid in one lump sum. And that means if you're going to do that deal, you have to finance the actual release clause plus make the space on the wage bill. If you're then adding Rashford's wage and 40 million, it's very difficult for Barcelona. So we have heard some reports that Barcelona might sensationally somehow do Nico Williams and Marcus Rashford. And if that's the case, of course, Williams is going to be your left-sided player, and then Marcus Rashford would have to take on a more central role. And he's completely open to that. But Barcelona are prioritising Nico Williams first, and then we'll have to understand what kind of budget they've got left. And it might leave Rashford in a little bit of limbo, and he could end up being back at Manchester United, and then it will be very interesting to see whether Ruben Amorim makes a kind of so-called bomb squad and keeps him away from the first team, or whether it's better to sort of build up his match sharpness within the group and not make a thing of exclusion, which can devalue a player, and then hope that that positive pre-season actually tempts other suitors to allow Manchester United to get their 40 million. United's position is really clear here. They want 40 million pounds. They don't want to do a loan, and they want Rashford gone. And Barcelona's the player's preference. If he doesn't go there, there's Saudi interest from Al Ahly in particular. Rashford has had that before and never wanted to go to Saudi. There's a little bit of Turkish interest, and there's some formative inquiries, again, that have been made from Italy. You may remember when Milan signed Kyle Walker, they were looking at Rashford. They've not got Champions League football. And my understanding with Rashford is that he won't really significantly engage with suitors. At this point, anyway, I know it's a long window, but right now, he won't engage with suitors that don't have Champions League football, regardless of club stature. Because first of all, very important to him to be playing Champions League football a year before the World Cup in the hope of getting in Thomas Tuchel's squad. And second of all, he knows that these Champions League clubs can afford his wages, and the ones without it, like Aston Villa, probably can't. So he is in a little bit of limbo at the moment. But I would say it's a more self-created limbo, because instead of going on this like mini tour like he did last time and meeting several clubs with a view to a loan, he is waiting a little bit for Barcelona to see what happens with Nico Williams and in the early part of July. And once I think he understands if this Barca move is off because of Williams or is still on, then we'll get a little bit more movement. But he is 100% giving priority to Barcelona first.
It'll be interesting to see if they actually can move for them both. I find it unrealistic, but he must have some sort of confidence to be waiting around for them. So we'll see how that does develop. I mean, speaking about needing outgoings to bring incomings in, there was some news about Casemiro going to Saudi. Al Nassr was a club that I saw reported with the name of Casemiro. how true are them reports? I know you have excellent Saudi connections, and you're usually very, very on point with the Saudi stuff with Casemiro. And would that allow a midfielder to come in? Because we know that Ruben Amorim is desperate for an athletic type midfielder.
Yeah, I think a midfielder could come in with an outgoing if you got Casemiro off the books, and you would bring in a fee, remember, because he's still quite well contracted, then that would be put on the number 9 first again. So it's not a case of whoever leaves. I don't think you'll see a case of whoever leaves, an instant positional replacement comes in. The first thing will be get these 2 number 10s in, Cunha plus Mbeumo. Second thing will still be number 9, but it's not to discount a midfielder. And this is where the interest, for example, even though it won't excite Manchester United fans, we discussed it on the last show, in Wilfred Ndidi comes in. Not because he's the perfect profile, but he's the right kind of price, and he still allows you to put budget towards a number 9. I don't sense that Ndidi is like the leading choice for Manchester United. But what I do sense is if they spend a lot of their budget in other positions and then realise they don't have 30, 40, 50, 60 million on a midfielder, then you start looking at more budget options. And that's where a player like Ndidi's profile is of interest as a squad player, but it's certainly not to paint him as a leading target. It's just the fact that Manchester United are aware that that 9 million relegation release clause at Leicester is actually quite a appealing number, but I still sense Manchester United would probably have other midfielders above him in their pecking order. Regarding Casemiro in Saudi Arabia, I made some calls on this last night, and I didn't really get much traction, to be honest. What's true is that Casemiro has had one of these central Saudi offers for quite some time. So he knows the terms, he knows they want him, and all of that is absolutely true. And these letters of interest that are non-binding, a bit like Bruno Fernandes had, tend to drop on you a bit like your Harry Potter letter, and you open it and think, wasn't expecting that. And then you realize it's non-binding and it outlines all of the facts and figures that you need. And then they may or may not follow that up. So if they approach Casemiro, the central part of this Saudi operation, which is essentially the Ministry of Sport and Saudi Pro League officials, have done the due diligence on Casemiro. They approached him in 2023, 2024, and it's no surprise that there is more contact for 2025. But it reminds me of the Son situation where it's soft contact. There's no club allocated to Casemiro. And the only thing they really want to know through that contact is, has the player changed his mind? If Casemiro gives encouragement that he's prepared to go to Saudi Arabia, then a meaningful conversation will start. And that's not happening at the moment. With Al Nassr specifically, I think we're going to hear a lot of noise around these players because they're trying to show ambition in the market in order to persuade Cristiano Ronaldo to finally extend. And time is ticking away because Ronaldo's contract expires on the 30th of June. Al Nassr have always stated they're confident, and Cristiano Ronaldo is on record alluding to the fact that he'll extend. But I think in the last few weeks, he's wanted to see business. He's wanted to see Al Nassr move in the market. He's wanted to ensure that they bridge the gap on the now champions Al Ittihad and Al Hilal. And Al Nassr do not have AFC Champions League, which is definitely going to be a factor in them getting the top players. So there's a lot of factors that make it difficult for Nassr to bring a player like Casemiro at this stage. And they would have to get that budget signed off by central deal makers. So there's nothing advanced yet between Casemiro and Al Nassr. Saudi, more broadly, and Casemiro could definitely be one to watch. And we've known for a few windows that the right number, and with Casemiro's blessing, Manchester United would be prepared to sanction that exit. But at this stage, the notion that Al Nassr are close is not my understanding. And if Al Nassr are going to move, you have to understand a few other points. The key one is the Ronaldo extension needs to happen, and that's going to be their priority in the next few days because the contract expires on the 30th of June. The other political aspect at Al Nassr is the fact that their CEO has stood down, and in standing down, he was accused of leaking sensitive information on social media. He then issued a statement saying he's taking litigation against the club. The club responded and stated they stand by the sacking. And then the CEO issued another statement saying there's no plan. How are we supposed to get the best players when there's no recruitment plan, there's no budget, there's no commonality, it doesn't suit the system. You've had Pioli there, and that's been a bit of a rocky ride too. So a lot behind the scenes is going to have to happen to put Al Nassr in a position where they can actually get sign-off to bring in a player of the caliber of Casemiro. And the last point that I would make away from Manchester United is that Al Nassr's number one priority is to try and find a left winger. So keep an eye, if Luis Diaz doesn't happen to Al Nassr, on other options. And this is where a lot of people are talking about Manchester United having a lot of left-sided players for sale. You never know. They might come into the mix. Then they want to bring in more of an attack-minded midfielder. And that's where Mohamed Kudus comes in. And in addition to that, we have to wait and see what happens with John Duran, with some Saudi media saying he's unhappy there, in which case they'll want to sign another striker. I'm not aware of Al Nassr desperately needing a deeper lying midfielder. Al Ahly's the club, and Neom FC is the other one that I'm told are looking for a number 6, a midfield metronome, this kind of profile. I think Al Nassr want players that can add goals. So you don't turn down Casemiro if he says he wants to go to Saudi, but I'm not aware of anything advanced yet between Al Nassr specifically and Casemiro.
And then in terms of any other midfield outgoings for Manchester United, in that I was thinking Collier potentially, could he be going out on loan on? And also, who was I moving on to next with the midfield? Mainoo, is it looking like he's going to sign a new contract?
Yeah, my information on Mainoo hasn't changed, that even though we may hear games and noise and the words pure profits, which I think most fans are getting sick of, the reality is that Mainoo's preference is to stay at Manchester United. And I still think Ruben Amorim is on the same page there. So these kind of renewals can take time. And I'm not aware right now of anything being imminent. Let's see what the summer brings. But just because it's not about to be announced, it doesn't mean that the talks haven't been positive. And right back to the time when it was said Chelsea were going to bid for Mainoo, and their interest out of opportunism was certainly genuine, same as Morgan Rogers at Aston Villa. But if you go all the way back to that kind of saga where it looked like there might be an offer for Mainoo and Manchester United might be reluctant sellers, guess what? Nothing happened. And that's because my understanding still remains that Mainoo is giving priority to Manchester United and Manchester United are giving priority to Mainoo. And my expectation is, unless this PSR position is so dramatically worse than we're led to believe, that Manchester United, financially speaking, if they can sell Garnacho and bring in money for Rashford and so on, will not, from a PSR perspective, have to sell Mainoo. And once you remove that PSR aspect from the equation, you've got a club that wants to keep the player and you've got a player that wants to stay at the club. So my expectation is still, even if we hear a lot of rumours, noise, maybe even some genuine clubs coming forwards, that Mainoo will stay. Nothing yet on Collier other than there's some interest from the Championship in terms of a loan there. I'd heard Middlesbrough the other day in particular were relatively keen. But I think Manchester United and Amorim in particular will want to understand what they're doing with him first. So anybody wanting a loan, if that's to be sanctioned, I have no information on that at this point. But anybody perhaps interested in that kind of deal might have to wait until a few weeks after pre-season starts, because it sounds to me like Ruben Amorim wants a lot of these players in his squad that featured last season, that are up and coming, maybe even some young players from the academy that haven't yet had their opportunity. It sounds like he wants a slightly bigger squad for pre-season to really look at everyone firsthand, because to him, this is kind of day one, which I know sounds strange, but Omar Barada instanced this in his interview that he did on the club website, which was obviously originally published via the excellent Andy Mitton. And in that, Barada said it kind of helps in many ways that the Amorim appointment allowed him to have these twists and turns mid-season, because now he's heading into his first full summer and he's actually got that context and that understanding of everything, who his leaders are, who his players are, who suits his system, what he needs in the market. And I think Amorim may bill this summer as a completely blank slate and in his mind day one. because remember when he was almost forced to take the Manchester United job early and after Ten Hag, he told Manchester United at that point he preferred to start this summer. So in his head, it was always, if I come in at Manchester United immediately, it might be risky. I want to start in summer 2025. And Manchester United said, hard luck. We're Manchester United. If you want to come to Manchester United, you come to Manchester United. If you want to wait for Manchester United, there's hundreds of other managers that would move here in a heartbeat. So Amorim had to basically come earlier than he wanted. And now I think in the context of Collier and other players and who's going to be loaned and all of that, he'll be using this first full summer with a bit of calmness and hopefully some stability and some fresh faces to really make those decisions personally. And he doesn't hold this Ten Hag type veto in recruitment, but he absolutely holds this full autonomy and veto in selection. And he'll be using pre-season, no doubt, to make some of these decisions, including likely on Collier.
Thank you for that, Ben. And Rob Always United has put in a chat and asked you, asked me, can you ask about keepers, Beth? Well, I will do. Ben, where are we at on the keepers? Is there any news whatsoever? Emi Martinez, Diogo Costa, two names I keep hearing. Any other names? And we spoke last time about the deadline in terms of PSR with Aston Villa, likely before the end of June. Well, June's ticking away. Could this be something that does develop, or is it looking less likely as the days go on?
Well, it's a big week for Villa. It's as simple as that. I still expect them to need an outgoing. We wait and see whether that's Jacob Ramsey, Emi Martinez. We know that a lot of clubs are circling around Morgan Rogers, but he feels untouchable at this point. Regarding Martinez, I'll repeat, and I use the word repeat, because what sort of happens with these stories is that they get out there on different platforms, and then people, particularly the Villa fans, get a little bit frustrated because they feel like there's a big push to drive Martinez out of their club. But that's the reality, that he might be the one that has to go. And the situation with Emi Martinez is twofold. The player camp have made it absolutely clear to Manchester United that they're interested. But the Manchester United camp are not yet the ones driving this, because they haven't made this determination on Onana. So there's two different points here. Manchester United know if they wanted to move for Emi Martinez, the player would be keen, but they haven't yet made any determination on Onana. And Onana, in light of that, is only basing his viewpoint and his stance on what he's always been told in the last few months, that he is Manchester United's number one. So even though it could become an open situation, Manchester United need to communicate if Onana is surplus to requirements, and that hasn't been done yet. And if they stick with Onana, then it's very difficult to think that Manchester United will move for any of these number one goalkeepers, and they'll revert back to their original plan, which in January was about Binder departing and finding a number two. And as I said on the last show, you had Joan Garcia, but he told everyone he wants to be a number one and has now gone to Barcelona. Jordi Petrovic is a player that Manchester United appreciate. He's available for 30 million euros on a gentleman's pact. He's scouring for options. But Petrovic was the number one under Maurizio Pochettino. He was the number one and the player of the season at Strasbourg. And again, he's caught between sort of the profile that he craves, which is to get absolute guarantee of minutes, and the kind of keeper that Manchester United are maybe looking for, which is someone that can compete with Onana if he stays, but come in and start as a number two. And that's why I don't think that one will develop. We've heard links in the past with James Trafford. Newcastle are the ones that are really pushing for that one. Trafford, according to my information, has an asking price of 35 to 40 million. So maybe similar to what Villa would ask for Emi Martinez. And he, again, wants to be a defined number one. So Manchester United have got a big decision to make, and it's very much an internal one rather than reacting to the market and feeling that they need to force their way into conversations. Is Onana definitively the number one? And from what I'm told, Ruben Amorim wants that clarified right away. So if Onana walks through the door on July the 7th, then the expectation is he's the number one, and Manchester United are looking for a young number two. And suddenly you have a situation where you're discounting some of the names like Costa and Martinez that have been mentioned. If alternatively in the next week, they suddenly start going more aggressive on goalkeepers and testing the water, you start to think they're looking for an Onana replacement. And if they find one, then they'll tell Onana he's no longer required. And that to me felt like Chelsea's tactic, where they were trying for Mike Maignan, but as soon as they failed, it was rewritten a little bit as they're backing their existing goalkeepers. So keep an eye on the goalkeeper situation, because we might see a bit of that. Dip your toe in the water, see if anything's possible with someone. If it's not, revert back to the fact that Onana's the number one and that was always your plan. If you find a goalkeeper, bring him in, then they'll have to resolve the Onana situation relatively quickly. But I think with the goalkeepers and the number one, Ruben Amorim doesn't want this to be a is or isn't Onana the number one all the way through pre-season. I think it's going to be something that is actually clarified relatively quickly. And once again, it is true Emi Martinez would like Manchester United, but it's also true that Manchester United haven't told Onana he's surplus to requirements, and the two are linked, because as long as Onana is at the football club, it will be very tough to bring in a goalkeeper of Martinez's calibre. Then regarding the Villa position on Martinez, they would sell for a number between 35 and 40 million. They may have to sell if they don't find another outgoing. So Martinez's future more broadly is one to keep an eye on in the next few days. Regarding Costa, as we said on the last show, it is a name I keep hearing, but I'm not aware of any outreach or approach yet. But there is some appreciation there, and some of that does come from Ruben Amorim. So there is a little bit of internal movement on the goalkeepers front, but I still kind of feel, unless a bargain becomes available for Martinez in the next few days, and unless a quick determination is made by Andre Onana, this one might die down a little bit, because really Manchester United's absolute focus now is make sure that Mbeumo doesn't slip through the net. And then once again, rather than that number one goalkeeper, it might be more shortlisting a younger number two profile that's prepared to wait, compete with Onana, but not expect to play right away. And if they do go down that route, that was always their original plan. So it's sort of circling all the way back to the fact that actually this is about replacing Bayern and not Onana.
Yeah, it will be interesting. I think a lot of it does also depend on money. And like you said, Mbeumo is going to be around 60 million. I know it's not all paid at once. And then you're looking for a striker as well. Without the outgoings happening, it might be difficult financially for Manchester United. So yeah, July the 7th. Watch out for that date, everybody. And speaking of July the 7th, I mean, I doubt we'll have managed to get a striker over the line for that date. But in regards for strikers, Ben, we're definitely in for them. Where are we at with Arsenal, Sesko, Gyökeres, a little triangle going on? Because obviously Arsenal are dictating this situation with Gyökeres, it feels like. So if they are moving closer towards Sesko, that might put us back in that race. And is there any other strikers that you can bring in that Manchester United are looking to maybe divert to if they don't end up getting Victor Gyökeres?
Yeah, Andrea Berta has taken both Sesko and Gyökeres to an advanced state. And he's done that very intentionally, because guess what? They want Sesko for 70. They want Gyökeres for 70. And the first club to kind of bend and give them that 70 will likely be the one that Arsenal bid for. And then I think the feeling within Arsenal is that if they get the right price for either, both of those players will agree terms with Arsenal, so they'll get the one that they want. And this is Berta's style. It's a bit different to Manchester United. The sagas play out a bit more publicly. Players are pitted against each other. Clubs are made to sweat a bit more. Whereas with obviously Manchester United, they've gone, we want Cunha, we've got him. We want Mbeumo, we've got him. They've not necessarily gone, we want Mbeumo, but we're going to put a bid down for Nkunku. But there's definitely an element of that Berta-type tactic in the whole, as we alluded to earlier, Nkunku suddenly back on United's radar, because maybe it scares Brentford and they think, wait a minute, they're similar prices. If we don't agree to this, they've got another option. But nothing is developing between Nkunku and Manchester United, whereas with Berta, he's actually speaking to both clubs daily about both players. So there could be a scenario where whoever Arsenal go for opens the door for Manchester United for the other. And the natural expectation is if Gyökeres doesn't join Arsenal, then he hasn't rejected Manchester United, so he could be a possibility. But I'm told also not to discount a scenario where Gyökeres goes to Arsenal and Sesko comes back into Manchester United's thinking as well, simply because 12 months ago they made a relatively strong pitch, but Sesko decided to stay at Leipzig. So both of those could be possibilities. As I've said many times, I'm not aware with anything with Victor Osimhen. Some initial contacts took place for Hugo Ekitike. There's no way Manchester United are paying 100 million euros. And I find it quite telling that Frankfurt want that number, so they're fueling this bidding war. And every single week, there's a new Premier League suitor allegedly coming to the table, and any conversation feels like it's being leaked as far more advanced than when I make inquiries it actually is. First, it was Chelsea. They're advanced. They're the favourites. And they weren't. And they were never close to Ekitike. Then it's Manchester United. Everyone gets excited. And then at the end of it, you just hear Liverpool thrown in as an afterthought. And I actually think the reality is Frankfurt are waiting for Liverpool, and Liverpool are first determining whether Isak is genuinely feasible. And if he's not, I think there's a fair chance that Liverpool significantly up their efforts to try and sign Hugo Ekitike. And because they're great readers of the market, they'll wait a little bit longer, because the feeling is that by mid-July or even early August, that price for Ekitike will drop. So we can't discount Manchester United for Ekitike, but obviously, unless they've got double the budget that we've been led to believe, it's going to be really tough for them to meet the asking price of Frankfurt. Šeško will be a bit more economical because, first of all, you're talking around the 70 maximum if it's the release clause, 80 euros in terms of millions mark. Whereas obviously at the moment, Ekitike is a £100 million player, but also the wage of Šeško will, as I understand it, be much lower than the wage that Ekitike is looking for. So the overall cost of doing a Šeško will be cheaper. You could even argue Gyökeres as well, because there's very high agent fees and there's high wages. If they went for Victor Gyökeres, the outlay on the player side is higher than virtually any of their other targets, but it's 70 million compared to 100 million at the moment anyway, if you're comparing the two fees. And that 30 million saving allows you to put that money onto the player side, potentially still making it quite an appealing deal. So that's kind of where we're at the number 9. And I know it sort of sounds like we're repeating ourselves, but it is simply the fact that, once again, Manchester United are working on Mbeumo. They're putting their time and energy into getting that over the line. That will get them the 2 quick signings they're looking for if it's completed by the 7th of July. And then this whole push for a number 9 is expected to come later as a result, rather than, as you said in your question, for the 7th of July. It'd be a really big surprise, and it would be against our understanding of the finances that Manchester United have if they bring in 3 big players, Cunha, Mbeumo, and a number 9 before the 7th of July. I don't want to say it won't happen categorically, because it's Manchester United, and maybe we'll be surprised and they'll show incredible financial flex and ambition, but I'm not aware of any number 9 yet, as far as Manchester United are concerned, as being close. And to get it close, they might also have to resolve the future of Rasmus Hojlund first as well.
Yeah, I mean, we could touch on that right at the end of the show, because I do want to ask you about Jadon Sancho and Rasmus Hojlund, which a lot of people are asking about. But one that keeps coming through, Ben, so I thought I'd put it to you, is the chat want to know if Manchester United do actually have any interest in Richard Rios, the midfielder. A lot of people in our viewership really like this player. Are Manchester United looking at him?
Yeah, I've heard a lot of noise about Rios, and at the moment, I think you have a situation where he's only focused on the Club World Cup, and he's been absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
We're definitely seeing growing interest as a consequence. And this is one of the interesting things about this tournament, right? That you have a scenario where, because it's coming on a world stage, even though if your team isn't in it, not everyone's watching it, you're getting that kind of World Cup thing of who's going to be that James Rodriguez type player that gets his big move after the tournament. And at the moment, I think Rios could be one of them. What I can tell you is Manchester United have scouted the player, but scouting doesn't mean a great deal. And now that Palmeiras are through, we're going to have to be very patient with this saga. I think the attributes that he brings, it's fair to say, suit the kind of profile that Ruben Amorim is looking for. He's extremely athletic, he's physical, he's intelligent, progressive passer, moves well into space. So all of that is very positive. But at this stage, I'm not aware of Manchester United making any sort of club-to-club approach or any move on the player side at the moment. Nottingham Forest are the only Premier League team I know that have actually made contact on the player side. And I think at this stage, if he continues to perform and put himself in the shop window, there will be other clubs. And who knows, Manchester United could be one of them because they're aware of the player, they've tracked the player, but that's about it at this stage. There's nothing particularly advanced. Tottenham are another club to watch. PSG also really like the player too. So Manchester United could be there, but at this stage, I'm not told it's a name that they're really focusing on. But let's see whether that develops after the Club World Cup, because the good news with Rios is that many fans may be watching him and saying, we've got to move here. And if we don't move quickly, someone else is going to snap this guy up because he's been brilliant at the Club World Cup. But actually, the player side have said if he moves, he doesn't want to have these conversations now anyway. And that's the key to succeeding with these kind of transfers. You have to understand when the player wants to speak to you and when the player wants to focus on his football. So I don't get the impression, even though Forest have actually made some formal inquiries, that this is a saga that's going to play out or resolve itself in the next 2 weeks, which means if Manchester United do choose to enter the race, and like I say, I've got no information at this point as to whether they will or won't, but if they do choose to enter the race and follow up on that scouting with a more formal approach, it's probably one for mid-July or even early August, which means that time is at least on Manchester United's side.
Absolutely. I mean, I personally would love us to explore that deal. But again, it's about getting the attacking players in first as in the front three. I think that's what Manchester United's focus is. I mean, to help with that, outgoings would be nice. I know we've already spoken about Garnacho and Rashford, Ben, but still reports circulating about Inter Milan trying to get something done for Rasmus Hojlund. Is that looking more likely to happen? Because we know there was noise that Rasmus Hojlund wanted to stay and fight for his place at Manchester United, but these Inter Milan rumours just will not go away. Is it going to take up any speed? And then I'll ask you about Jadon Sancho after that one.
Yeah, again, the book loss point keeps being made like a broken record, I know, but it will have to be a structure that suits Manchester United. Inter are interested in Hojlund, and there can be a possibility that he exits, but it's really just going to be about the structure of the deal. Manchester United don't want a permanent exit where they're going to make a book loss. It's counterproductive. So I think it's a bit chicken and egg at the moment, where if Manchester United feel they can find a number 9, then maybe later in the window, they'll tell Rasmus Hojlund he's further down the pecking order. And then perhaps that will be the one that's sanctioned with a loan with an option or an obligation, because Inter is simply not prepared to pay this roughly 80 million euros number that Manchester United would be asking for a permanent sale. In fact, my understanding is Inter's valuation of Rasmus Hojlund is closer to 40 million euros. And at that number, it's just not worth Manchester United doing. But imagine if you got a loan fee of 5 to 7 million euros, you got full wage coverage, and you got an option to buy, then you brought in a new number 9. That might be a deal that suits all parties. So Hojlund is waiting for Manchester United to communicate that someone else is potentially coming in. You're too far down the pecking order. And maybe that changes his perspective. But at the moment, until he's told that, he's fighting and thinking he can change Ruben Amorim's mind and still be a very effective forward. But I think what's working against him is the fact that Ruben Amorim has pushed and will continue to push for a number 9. And whoever that number 9 is, whether it's one of the big names we've mentioned, or at the end of it all, it's like a more short-term loan for a player like Alexander Mitrovic that we've discussed before, somebody's going to come in between now and the end of the window. And then I sense that Xerxes is creeping ahead of Hojlund in this Manchester United pecking order simply because of the versatility and the fact a lot of people actually at Manchester United are quite happy with Xerxes, even though when you look at the finishing and when you look at the output, it's definitely below what's required. But within training and within instances in matches, even if he's not 100% consistent, Ruben Amorim, from what I'm told, likes the fact that Xerxes is versatile. He feels that there's a role that he can play in a slightly deeper position. He can hold up the ball. He does good defensive work. He's physical. He's athletic. So naturally, the goals are missing, but there's definitely this sense within Manchester United that Xerxes can have a breakthrough season next campaign, whereas Rasmus Hojlund kind of hit a bit of a scoring streak under Ten Hag and then hasn't been able to replicate that. So I think Manchester United would sanction some kind of exit, providing they can find a number 9. But the challenge at the moment is Inter are there saying we would take the player permanently for 40 million euros, and Manchester United are saying we need double that, otherwise it's just not worth our while. So we're going to have to be patient with the Hojlund situation, but still keep an eye on Inter, because their interest is genuine. And if the right kind of deal presents itself in terms of structure, then it is definitely something that from Inter's side, they would be prepared to proceed with.
It feels as if a lot of Manchester United's outgoings are looking to happen maybe towards the later stages of the window. How Manchester United will be able to do all of this, I'm not so sure. I mean, do you think it's going to be tough, Ben, to get all the outgoings done that it feels like we need to do?
Yeah, I think Manchester United are going to have to be quite bullish and make it clear that maybe there's certain prices for certain players that are available now. And if they're not met with urgency and speed, then maybe that deal isn't available later in the window. And you sort of take the risk of almost being stuck with the player, but you take the gamble of saying, do it now and you have it for this. If you don't, then we're not coming back to you with the same offer at the end of the window. And it'll be interesting to see who wins this sort of battle, because the delay is not really on Manchester United's part. I don't think 40 million is a particularly bad price for a well-contracted player like Marcus Rashford, but the wage is the problem, and the fact that the player wants to wait. I think you can make a very strong argument that Antony had an outstanding loan spell at Betis. So why should Manchester United allow Betis to come back in with another loan on their terms when there probably are other clubs interested in Antony, because he's shown his kind of potential with Garnacho? If you look at the market and other players, Nico Williams is 58 million euros, which is about 50 million quid, but only because of a release clause. If you were valuing Nico Williams away from that release clause, he'd probably be 100 million euros player. Jamie Gittins, Dortmund won 55 or 60 million euros. Garnacho's an established Premier League player capable of the sublime. Look at the overhead kick against Everton. So is Garnacho worth more than Gittins to a club that wants experience and a player with a high ceiling? You would probably say yes. And therefore, once again, this number of roughly 60 million doesn't feel too extortionate. If it drops to 50, maybe not a disaster. If you can raise it to 65, then brilliant. But it doesn't feel to me that Manchester United are putting exorbitant prices on any of these players. It's just the fact that we're so early in the window. And if you're a European suitor, remember, you're not starting now until the 1st of July. So that's why we're hearing talks, but no real completed deals yet from many of these European clubs. And if you're a Premier League club, you're facing all this financial deadline. And even if your position is healthier, you still probably prefer to do the deals on July the 1st. So we're in a kind of limbo week in the window. And this is why I think that nothing is moving yet as far as outgoings are concerned. And then once again, if Manchester United are out there going, well, actually, you can have Garnacho for 45, you can have Rashford for 25, you can have Sancho for 20, even though the obligation to buy was 25, and you can have Antony on a loan. They weaken their position in the market and they don't get deals that are worth their while. So they're smart, in my opinion, to just stick to these asking prices so early in the window and make the seller for once get the amazing deal at Manchester United and make the buyer pay Manchester United a buying tax instead of the other way around. And if they can do it that way and be equally as disciplined with the outgoings, then suddenly both incoming and outgoings, you're getting value for money. And that's what's been lacking at Manchester United for so many years. And if they can do that, their financial position will be healthier, and slowly but surely they'll be able to build.
Thank you very much, Ben, for that insight. And, you know, you've made me feel a little bit better about the situation. So thank you for that. Last but not least, I want to ask you about Jadon Sancho. There's been reports about Juventus going in for him. There's been reports about Fenerbahce, you know, putting an offer on the table and agreeing to pay a wage. I mean, where is Jadon Sancho at? And are these deals as advanced as maybe has been reported?
Not necessarily as advanced, but I can confirm the Fenerbahce interest is genuine and they're looking for a player on that side. So could be one to watch because they do have significant budgets. Fenerbahce put a massive offer down for Leroy Sané, and he ended up going to Galatasaray, who also placed a lucrative number. And we're seeing this suddenly from Turkey that there's serious finances involved. So these clubs can afford a player potentially like Jadon Sancho, and Manchester United's position is the same. That obligation to buy for Chelsea of 25 million or so is still the ballpark that they would sanction an exit at, whereas a year ago the number was 40 to 45 million. And I actually think that for Sancho, maybe not at Manchester United because it hasn't quite worked for him, but generally for a club that looks at what he did in flashes at Chelsea and during his pomp at Dortmund, 25 million is quite a low number. And a lot of clubs will feel if they can agree with the player, they'll be willing to pay that 25 million. So it wouldn't surprise me if Manchester United can get that one done a little bit quicker than some of the other deals, simply because the fee there is not this 60 million Garnacho, 40 million for Rashford. Sancho's going to be a little bit cheaper. Fenerbahce wants to keep an eye on, but it'll all depend on whether the player wants to go to Turkey. I'm told he would like to stay in the Premier League if possible. He'd be open naturally to going back to Dortmund as well, but it looks like they've got other priorities at this stage, but we have to wait and see. So at the moment, I think Sancho may move a little bit quicker, especially if he gives a green light to Turkey. And then you've still got Saudi with Sancho as well, and a couple of clubs that are interested. Al Ahly are one of them. They have several targets on that left-hand side. We mentioned in the past Marcus Rashford. Vinny Jr. is the insane dream target that Saudi deal makers want to bring. And if they get him, he's likely to go to Al Ahly. A lot of talk about Vinny Jr. extending, but we haven't got confirmation yet that he signed that new deal at Real Madrid. So don't be surprised if Saudi still try audaciously for him. But Sancho's come up in Al Ahly talks as well on that left side, even though they brought in Galeno from Porto already. And Al Qadsiya are looking for a left-sided attacker as well. And they've got quite a lot of money to spend because unlike a lot of the other Saudi clubs, they're owned by Aramco, and Aramco don't rely on these central Saudi funds and permission to do deals funded essentially by the Ministry of Sport. Aramco are the Saudi oil giants, and if they want to spend their own money, they'll go and spend their own money. So finances will not be an issue for Al Qadsiya. And again, Sancho could be one to watch. The only thing about Saudi and Sancho to note is that when Manchester United were desperate to offload him, Al Ittifaq, with Steven Gerrard then in charge, made a call, and they were told categorically that Sancho was not keen even on a loan to Saudi Arabia. So players can change their minds, but key to a quick Sancho deal, you feel, might be more that route of Turkey or Saudi Arabia. And that will all just depend on whether the player changes perspective and is prepared to go there or wants to remain in one of Europe's big five leagues. And that's the thing we don't yet know the answer to. Sancho really had his heart set on Chelsea. They couldn't agree terms. And now he's back where he started and has to reassess whether he's going to wait it out and get one of those big five leagues, or whether he's going to take the money in either Turkey or Saudi Arabia. And if he decides the latter, then actually that deal to either destination can happen quite quickly.
Ben, thank you so much for all of your insight. I mean, I hope these deals happen sooner rather than later, but we'll have you on again. I'm sure we'll get some more updates and great stuff on the Mbeumo yesterday as well. And hopefully we have a date soon for Mbeumo to be an official Manchester United player. Hopefully Brentford don't take too much time making up their mind whether they're going to accept.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. I mean, it's kind of panic stations in many ways when you're over here in America. I'm covering the Club World Cup, obviously, because I'm waking up and I'm thinking, it's 8 o'clock now, it's already lunch. So I was actually expecting to be a little bit behind on this one. And now I'm obviously going to make some calls and find out what the lay of the land is and see if we can stand up this divide between guaranteed fee and add-ons, and then work out whether or not we're going to get an acceptance or rejection. But what I would say just finally is the longer it goes without clarity on that, the better news it is for Manchester United, regardless of outcome. Because when you don't make a competitive offer, when you don't stand a chance, when you're miles off valuation, bids get rejected out of hand or very, very quickly you'll learn from the potential selling club that that bid's not good enough. And then I know it feels like you're back to square one. If we get a scenario where hours or days now pass, then it tells you two things. The first, that Manchester United have done their job, and in this 3-week delay, they've got very close. And second of all, a bit like Florian Wirtz and Liverpool, it may be an indication that the bid in its form maybe isn't quite there, but they don't want to reject it. What they're saying is maybe the guaranteed part's fine. Now let's discuss the add-ons, or now let's discuss the sell-on, or now let's discuss a smaller part. And that's kind of what happened with Kirkes and Wirtz for Liverpool. It's kind of what happened with Man City and Cherki. It's a little bit even what happened with Delap, even though there was a release clause with Chelsea. They still had to discuss the things like, were they going to pay it according to the stated terms? Is there a sell-on? Can you throw in a separate deal as a sweetener? And that's where Ipswich were discussing Mark Guy as a possible loan. The not Palace player, obviously, but the young Chelsea striker whose names sound quite similar. So this will actually be good news if we get a bit of radio silence for Manchester United, because if the bid was just not good enough, you tend to learn about that quicker. If you don't hear anything, it suggests that they're close. And obviously, if it's accepted straight away, then even better news.
Great stuff. Well, thank you, everyone. And Ben, thank you again. Excellent insight. And sorry again to everybody in the chat who had to deal with the Darth Vader robotic voice. But thank you to the producer and everyone helping behind the scenes to get that fixed. We do appreciate your patience. And thank you, Ben, for powering on like the professional that you are. We love it. We love it. These things happen, but we got all the information in the end, and that's the most important thing. But you were perfect, Ben. So thank you, everyone, for watching. Any more football news, just general football news, Premier League news, get over to That's Football daily updates every single day. We'll be back with Ben again next week, and make sure you smash a like on the video. Thank you for watching, everyone, and we will see you on the next one.